Let the show begin.
Let the show begin. Welcome, everyone. This is good to see everyone after the summer. Do we have a forum? We do. Yeah, good. All right. Yeah, we've got 4. This is good. We have 2 non-voting members, and good. So we can go to announcements. We should announce, I think everyone should be aware that Andy has resigned from ACPH. I think she just felt like she had too many things going on. So we have
much different for her from any other man.
maybe she felt it was harder for her.
We appreciate it.
So there is an opening. We have notified our 2 affiliate members. Yes, that's the word. That's opening, and we already do have 1 outside applicant. How long is it open till the end of September?
Yes, applications are open until Wednesday, the 24th.
Again, the process that we used last time was that at that point, Sigal, Rosemary, and I reviewed the applications and made our recommendations to the select board, but the select board in its wisdom may or may not follow our recommendations. So we'll see what happens. So Anthony and Mary already know, and another, and if you know other people as well.
Will we actually review these, or I guess after the 24th?
Yeah, after the 24th.
Was the select board made aware of the survey from last year? Remember, we had the survey of our group and there was data in there. And I think one of the questions was the select board aware of the data from us, like what our thoughts were?
So I think it's fair to say that we have shared some of that with at least Tivity,
Yeah.
right? With, but I don't know that that has been delivered to the select board, and that's certainly something we could share with them as part of this.
Absolutely. I mean, our self-evaluation is what you're referring to? Sure.
Yeah. Because at least from my part, there was information on there that I felt was informative to the select board because it had to discuss what our thoughts were about the composition, and they're the ones who make up the composition.
Yeah.
So it's helpful for us to talk about it, but they're the ones who it most directly impacts, at least from our point of view.
Great idea.
I can send that over.
And I believe this is also the first meeting in which John is present as our acting. Is that correct?
Yes, this is week 9, I think. Who's counting as interim director?
Good.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of
we're
course.
thrilled.
Happy to serve. The staff have been fantastic, so none of this works without the staff. So it's been great. Good team effort, and I think we've kept everything running pretty well.
Great. Yeah, we're thrilled. This is great. It's been a pleasure to work with you in this role, as it has been in the previous role. Good. Any other announcements? Maybe, do you want to maybe just say anything about Brookline Day? We were talking about it briefly. Anything?
Yeah, so we had, I think Brookline Day, there was a great reception. There was a ton of residents yesterday. I mean, I think it was probably the biggest crowd I think I've seen around our table. We usually have pretty good crowds. And I think that was across the board for all the booths.
Well, the setup was good in that the town booths were right in front on Harvard Street last year. I think they were on Green Street or something like that. So this was good.
Yeah, and we gave out a lot of freebies and resources and had some good conversations. And I think I had some conversations around COVID, which we can talk about later during the vaccine discussion. And got a chance to just engage with some residents and answer some kind of tricky questions, and even at one point connect one of them with Chaz. So it was nice that we were all kind of in the same space, and we could just say, here, let me walk you over and we can have this conversation right now. So it's a good day. I love Brookline Day. And I'm appreciative I went down the list today. I think we had 9 or 10 staff volunteer at one point yesterday. So there was good representation across our divisions too. Yeah, appreciate our staff.
I did comment the department does hand out lollipops which, is not the best health thing. So I was trying to think of whether we can come up with like xylitol or something like that, lollipops that are good for your teeth that like, anyhow, I'll look into it and see what we can do for next year and get healthier snacks.
What are pediatricians doing in their office these days?
Stickers alone.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Stickers only, please.
Mhm. Which is what Kat does, right? For the vaccine
Yeah.
clinic here, she does stickers.
I do
and-
feel like it's a bit of a bummer, but it is true. Like
That's why we get so many kids with
I know.
They're
that's what
small,
I'm
they're little
saying.
dum-dums, you guys.
I don't want to. This is being recorded, but later I can tell you a story about what happened in my old office and the lollipops and why they are no longer.
an aspiration or something.
No. Let's just say a parent complained in a big and angry way.
All right, those are the updates. So we'll give the hi Sheriff. We'll give opportunity for public comment. We don't have any members of the public, despite the fascinating, important agenda that we have. I
Yeah.
thought we might get better attendance, but I guess we need the publicists. All right, hearing not, I think we can skip over the public comment section then and move on to approval of the minutes. Do you have any, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Yeah.
All right, Len moves, Rosemary seconds, all in favor, any opposed, any abstentions? No, all right, I guess the minutes are approved. All right, Anthony, the floor, and Riley, please, thank you. Just a momentary lapse.
So before we get started, I have one mistake I've made here is you do not have in your packets the tobacco regulations, which Riley sent to me. And I failed that we were gonna update the packet, that's on me. And it doesn't preclude having the discussion tonight, but I want you all to have enough time to review them. So we will get those out, we'll put this back on the agenda for the next meeting, but I think this will be a good introduction to the revisions anyway. So thank you, Riley.
Yes, of course. So we're looking at updating the tobacco regulations and also creating them as like health department regulations versus being a bylaw, especially when looking at tobacco. The industry moves so quickly. It feels very important to be able to update these in maybe a slightly like more expeditious fashion. So today I just wanted to highlight what the updates would be that we were looking at. And Anthony, thank you so much for also working through these with me. So it kind of starts with the definitions. So in order to add some of the regulations we're looking at, some of the definitions need to be.
Maybe you want to share your screen?
Oh yeah,
maybe
no one
read-
has this. I can send it.
Email it
out.
over to you so you can just put it up on the screen.
Yeah, you're good to go.
And I have a copy if people want to look through it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you have to log in. Or do you want to? Would it be easier for me to email it to you, or would it be? Yes.
Should we have some house music while we?
Logistic.
Well, I guess maybe while we're waiting or so, Anthony, you presented at the State House, right, regarding the tobacco regulations or the proposed regulations on a statewide basis?
I didn't present, but I went and provided testimony when they had their hearing in July. They were supposed to have discussions, and I think open comment for the public is through this month for the House. The Senate has looser rules. Usually would be until about December. So there is still time for public comment. I have to be honest, I think the most important thing would be public comment from the communities for the other House reps and senators on that bicameral group, because it's a combined committee for both the Senate and the House. So it would probably be helpful for other communities to weigh in, because as we know, House reps and senators are most likely to be impacted by the stories in their communities. Certainly doesn't hurt for us to provide input, but it would be helpful to hear from other communities around the Commonwealth.
So it's not moved out of committee yet, or committee review at this point then?
I haven't heard that there has been a vote yet to move it out of committee. But like, I suspect the earliest would be later this month. I haven't reached back out to Tommy in the last few weeks to find out if there's been any update.
Correct?
And also, please let me know if anyone at any point can't hear me, or if I start to speak a little too quickly. I know I have a problem with that. I don't mind you guys calling me out on it. But as I said before, I'm going to scroll down a little ways into the definitions. This is where kind of the first changes are, just in order to add new regulations or update some. We have to update some definitions. So for the first kind of update, we have manufacturer documentation. So this is required by the state. Basically, the manufacturers of tobacco products have to write a letter that is signed by the CEO or a designee saying that the products that they are distributing to these retailers are not flavored based on Massachusetts law. And so this is just a way to hold them legally accountable. And so the retailers need to have these manufacturer documents like on hand. So when I go in and do my inspections, I ask for these. So the definition for these is included here. The definition can be expanded past this to include everything that a manufacturer letter has to have in order to be viable. It's like up to us as to whether or not we would like to include that in the definition. It's just either having it all in one place, but I also keep memos on me from DPH when these were initially asked to be held by retailers by the state, that again also lists everything that needs to be involved in these manufacturer documents. I'm also happy to one-on-one with retailers, make sure that they're aware of what those are without it having to be present in the definition.
The definition wouldn't change what you're doing for enforcement.
No. We have
Oh,
also.
thank you. That's very nice.
Working on it.
Like, should we? Oh, I was gonna say, should we share? Thank you. Right.
Okay, no worries. And then we also have the definition for oral nicotine pouches. So these are going to be things like Zen and other products where it's just strictly the nicotine salts and the pouch. And so this needs to be added in order to be able to regulate nicotine pouches. And now as we get actually down into regulated conduct, I'm gonna scroll until we get to.
Because they're not tobacco products.
They are under the definition of a tobacco product in Massachusetts. Oral nicotine pouches are a tobacco product, but in the ways like to specifically regulate them outside of like the flavor ban applies. So we'll get to it like specifically how we were looking at regulating those.
A lot of reasons to poison kids with them.
Yes, so first within the regulations underneath permitting, there's just an addition of the issuance of a tobacco product sales permit shall be conditioned on an applicant's consent to unannounced periodic inspections. So this is just including, again, something that's already in the state definition that already applies to everyone, just updating the Brookline's regulations to reflect that as well. So it's basically the retailers and their employees cannot interfere when I go into an inspection. That would incur a suspension of their permit, and as well as fines.
So we already have these regulations in Brookline's health department, these are modifications.
So yeah, all of the red is modifications,
Right.
like on top of
But all the rest of it, we have that.
Yes. Yeah, everything else is here. I'm just,
Okay.
this
Yep.
was, I typed this out as a full draft regulation to be reviewed, so that's why everything else is included rather than just the changes.
Okay.
Then moving on.
Just to remind us, what was the rationale for doing this?
So, the tobacco industry moves so quickly. Doing these as like a health department regulation, it can be a little bit quicker to update them as the industry changes and as things update, and also to just make some of these updates to be in line with like what the state has already said, as well as like nicotine pouches are new and there's something that we would like to have regulated. And then we get farther down looking at like the fining structure is another thing within the regulations we were looking at changing. So increasing the local fines for tobacco violations to be a bit more in line with the states, as the state raised their fines to be like criminal fines. You have $1,000, $2,000, and $5,000, whereas local fines are $1, $2, and $300. Especially looking at nicotine-free generation, it's nice to kind of have that consistency when it comes to the fining, especially for underage sales.
So is the revised regulation then subject to just select board approval, or is it a town meeting? Because the bylaw would be a town meeting vote, right?
It's in the authority of the
It's in
health
the authority of
department.
the health department to go ahead and
Yeah,
modify these.
The commissioner can issue it. I think the step that we still need to figure out with the town clerk and with town council is, given that a lot of this already exists in bylaw, do we have to rescind the bylaw at the same time we implement the regulation? Which is, my gut says that's the case, but
Controlling that.
yeah.
But that's why I'm confused. So we already have regulation.
Through bylaw.
Okay, so what's in here in the non-bright red stuff is consistent through bylaw.
Yeah.
Apologies for it.
And so,
No.
no, that's, no, it's the first
Helping
time we're
us
doing this.
understand
So
it.
this is the whole idea of our developing more regulations.
Because these are easier to change and there's more flexibility, but the enforcement is the same.
Yeah.
Why don't we always do it like this? I didn't mean that to be funny,
No,
but
I
like,
know, I
why
know.
not? Is it just that it didn't come up before? It seems like this is a much better way of managing.
I mean, I think Brookline's a little unique in that we have a robust town meeting here, right? And so a lot of this already just exists in the town
Yeah,
meeting
yeah, yeah.
bylaw. So it could just be, and I don't know if it's, having not been here when this passed originally, I don't know if it was town meeting went first, or if it's the commissioner didn't want to. I doubt it's the commissioner didn't want to, given, I know some of the previous commissioners, so. And then I think it's probably just difficult because the bylaw exists. Anthony, sorry, that's your job.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. The commissioner prior to Segal was very much opposed to taking any tobacco regulation. In fact, he even questioned when I came up with the flavor ban discussion. So it actually was the other way. We ended up at that time actually not doing a hearing for ACPH at that time because of the request of the Swanee at that time. He didn't want to move forward on this. And in fact, with a flavor hearing, he actually brought literature that was funded and supported by the tobacco industry. So at that time, we did not have a public health leadership that was in line with the stance of public health, at least with respect to tobacco and nicotine use. He felt that the state should lead at that time.
What happens when, you mentioned, for example, the fines are different at the state and the town level. So what happens then? Does the state preempt ours, or do we, $1,000 goes to the state and 300 comes to the town? And how does
Yes.
that?
So that's a really good question. I like to describe it a little bit as like the state's regulations are the foundation of your house, and then the town's local regulations build on top of that foundation. So if it's something in the foundation, if it's something written into the state's regulations, that will be a state fine. And so that will be enforced via the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and the suspensions laid out kind of in the state's regulations. And then if it's anything on top of that foundation, that's where your local fines will come in, and you'll be getting the 100, 200, 300.
Okay.
And it's common that the state actually preempts municipalities with this. So if you remember the firearms discussion as to why it's only capped to like $100 or $300 is communities can only fine to that amount. We can't put people in jail for certain violations, even of town laws. Those are reserved for the state.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, was which preempted, whether the preemption or not. It sounds like in this case, well, we can't go against what the state says, but we can.
Which would be status quo, right? Stay with a $100 structure for fines in this particular case with tobacco and nicotine products. I think Riley had other information in in this. I'm a little bit worried if we kind of like jump to the meat of the dish.
So, sorry. Nicotine content and e-cigarettes, this is one that, again, it exists at the state level. It's already something I enforce. It would just be adding it to Brookline's to make it more, or to have it here as well, just kind of best practice having it represented in the state or the local regulations as well as the state regulations. And then oral nicotine pouches is one where it's kind of entirely up to the municipalities at this point how they would like to handle it, if they want to regulate it at all, or which of the two options they would like to take. So currently you can limit the nicotine content within the pouches to 6 milligrams per pouch, which I have seen in stores as I've done inspections, like nicotine content up to 16 milligrams per pouch, which is a lot. So this is an option, or there is the nicotine pouches can only be sold in age-restricted, like adult-only 21+ tobacco stores, which there are none in Brookline, so effectively that would just be banning them. So those are kind of the two options for nicotine pouches.
I think there's some movement, I don't know where it is, on the national level to get child safety protection on these pouches so that kids can't open them, because right now they're openable by kids. And there's been a moderate number of poisonings from these nicotine pouches. They're attractive, they're simple to use, etc. So I don't know if we are allowed to say anything like that.
I'm not sure. To be honest, I haven't heard too much about that myself.
I'll see if I can track it down. I'm not sure. I'm an expert in the area.
If you're interested in seeing any of the packaging after the meeting, I do have some confiscated tins of Zen. If you would like to see it for yourself, if you haven't seen it in person, I can bring those up from my office. But I would like to hear more about
I'll try
that.
to write that down.
Thank you.
Anthony, were you going to say something that came up?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The FDA commissioner in recent weeks did bring up the idea of looking at how to minimize the risk to underage, to children and their access to nicotine pouches. I don't know what the timeline will be with that in terms of trying to look at like product security of it. So a couple of different data points. One is we know that nationally and kind of state level data is about a quarter of users of nicotine pouch are underage. We don't know Brookline specific data for the town. I think we're in the process of looking at some of the youth survey data, but I don't think it'll drill down that specifically. So we do know that it's not an insignificant proportion of people who are using nicotine pouches are underage. We also know that there's a risk minimization argument that nicotine pouches could be safer than actually smoking or potentially vaping. What we know is about a quarter of adult users or so are people who are dual users. In other words, they are already smoking and now they add on nicotine pouches. So again, it's not a small proportion that these are people that before nicotine pouches might have been using less, and now they're using the toxic part and adding on. As far as with that, only about 35% are people who had previously been smokers, and we don't know the relationship between the potency. You would suspect lower potency nicotine pouches would have been the thought process if someone is transitioning to quitting, just because you wouldn't want to transition something more potent and somehow you quit that. The Swedish maker, the most commonly used product, as was mentioned, is Zyn. Closely behind is On, and their market share is quickly doubling. And the reason for that is there is believed to be this economic principle of pricing, and On is priced at about probably about a third or half the price of Zyn. So it gives you an idea of just how much more room there is in the market for this addiction to grow because of the lower cost of this other product. So, those are some of the data points to consider, are that there is not an insignificant amount of people who are underage. There is not an insignificant number of people that are adults who are using this and actually become more addicted and are using more tobacco or nicotine than they were originally. And finally, the Swedish maker had the option to submit for recreational use versus nicotine replacement therapy with this product. And I think the discussion you see before you is what that company decided to do. They did not decide to go after nicotine replacement therapy as their indication. They decided to go after recreational use. And in fact, if you pull out your phone and you go to the Zyn website, you will see that they actually have like rewards. The more Zyn you use, the more things you could get as far as gift certificates, things like Lululemon and other places. So any idea that this might be marketed as a healthier option, I think should be easily dismissed. I think what is before you is what to do here in Brookline. We have no adult use only stores. And so the question is, decreasing the potency if you truly believe this is a less harmful product that people can use to transition versus medically approved products like nicotine patches, or banning it completely if you feel that this is just another workaround for tobacco to quickly try and capture market share, as we've gone away from cigarettes and now from vaping, that they're just trying to stay ahead technology-wise to keep their addiction market and their profit margins.
So are you asking for what we think about these choices?
Yes, I would love to hear the opinions of everyone.
We'd also like a vote at some point to move Brookline forward on some of these things, such as the finding structure and what to do with nicotine pouches, because other communities in Massachusetts have done both in terms of increasing their finding structure and also taking action of nicotine pouches. So even though we might not be able to vote today, I think the ultimate request is that Brookline also move forward to join other communities that have taken action in terms of oral nicotine pouches, and I think potentially improving our finding structure also to fit more with what's in line with the state regulations here.
So we don't have adult-only retail tobacco stores because kids can't, I mean, why would we have one, right? Because kids aren't allowed to get tobacco. And I mean, are there places, I guess I'm confused about that. There are places that sell tobacco where they say you can't even walk in the door?
We had one, it was shut down. If you remember at Coolidge Corner, where there's now like an ice cream or a boba tea place on the corner near
Yeah.
the alcohol store and the cleaners, that used to be a tobacco only establishment. And when Governor Baker put in place the governor's order end of 2019 during the vaping epidemic, where it was a freeze, that essentially caused them to close. They closed by December. Within 3 months, they shut down. So we did have an adult only store. And now, because permits are grandfathered, there can be no adult only stores granted permits at this point. So up to 6 years ago, we did have one and they shut down under the governor's order. It should be noted, not under our town vote, because that was not approved by the AG's office until end of December, and that store shut down prior to the AG fully approving Brookline's action.
And the toxicity, I'm just asking sort of devil's advocate, the toxicity of nicotine pouches, because presumably they don't have all the other evil things that happen in a cigarette, is just that it's an addiction in and of itself, or that it has, and again, I know there's the risk of poisoning and stuff like that, but the other toxicity associated with nicotine addiction is what?
So things like the other damage that can happen to the lungs from vaping and the other toxic substances that are in traditional combustible cigarettes are not present in nicotine pouches. So from that aspect, they could be deemed that they're less likely to cause things like lung damage. We think in theory, the bench studies haven't caught up yet to tell us if that's going to be the case, which again is a classic playbook from the industry, is to first say, we don't know that this will be a problem, and 10 years later we find out it does. So it does have, these pouches have less toxic substances in there. On the flip side, that does mean it's easier to use them, right? Like things that are limiting you in terms of having to like vape and inhalations and the toxic part of combustible cigarettes, those steps are not necessarily there. And so it could be easier to use the pouches. The pricing scheme of a pouch is also making it easier, right? So you could get a tin, Riley, correct me, for what, like $3 to $5?
I've seen it so far, it varies from town to town, but like 7 to 10, but for like, that's for Zen. On can be much, much cheaper, especially because there's currently no excise tax on nicotine pouches.
And if
Yeah.
the chewing tobacco or so, the oral malignancies or so have not been demonstrated because they don't have, I guess, the resident tars and other carcinogenic substances in it.
I mean,
that-
if I'd have to guess from kind of a pharmacological aspect, right? Like there isn't immediate tobacco that is in those other things, but again, this is similar to other things. We just don't have the bench data to know that yet. These products are relatively new, right? Like in the last decade or so in terms of being used in Europe, and then this big surge in the last 4 or 5 years in the US with Zen culture. So I can't speak to if it'll catch up. I'd imagine it would be less toxic than your classic chew that people put, but again, it's immediate skin contact. So probably definitely worse than not putting something in your body that shouldn't be there.
Just a cursory look on my phone said, gingivitis and things like periodontal inflammation. You can imagine you're sticking nicotine in there, and I think you would get an inflammatory reaction. So all the little bacteria that's living in there gets under the skin. But I mean, I don't think we want to like say no, this is bad for your gums. I mean, I think that I would feel comfortable saying this is not the direction we want to go. We don't want to replace cigarettes with little pouches of nicotine that are really attractive to children. I mean, something like that. Because very few people, like Anthony was saying, I mean, it was with adults, most adults who are using these products are dual users. They smoke also. And I definitely have seen children that start with vaping and then use cigarettes.
Right.
And also go to the Zen because it's easier to use in school now.
So in a sense, a gateway drug onto cigarettes and stuff.
I mean, I think it's a gateway drug to cigarettes because all roads lead to that. But I mean,
I'm just kicking the tires about us being, nanny state kind of stuff. You public health people,
I mean,
would we outline alcohol if we had that option? That kind of thing. I'm just kicking the tires on it.
There's an FDA report or recommendations. FDA urges nicotine pouch manufacturers to use child-resistant packaging as of September 5th. It's just an urge. There's something in here that I don't understand about how they license products.
I do know like the FDA regulations around tobacco can be very confusing.
Yes.
So the options in front of us really are banning it, the sale distribution, right?
Yeah, essentially, because there's no adult only.
So
yeah.
that would be one option. The alternative option is regulating the nicotine content so that it would be more appropriate as use for medicinal use, basically getting it off for replacement therapy.
Again, if you think this is more possibly more effective than our classically studied patches, nicotine gum like Nicorette and bupropion and prescription options, then yes, limiting the potency. If you're saying that, I think there's a place for this alongside what we know has been rigorously studied in medical studies, then that would be the option if that's your thought as far as minimizing the potency that's out there on the market.
But nobody studied it the same way that they've studied patches and gum.
I don't think with these types of products that has been studied in that manner rigorously. No. We've seen over the last few years discussions about like vaping studies that have come out and where it's been studied, but I don't think we've seen it essentially that these types of pouches are studied for cessation.
I do believe the FDA did say during their cursory looks at nicotine pouches that they did not approve them as a cessation device or something that could be used for cessation.
So it would make more sense to ban it, it sounds like.
It does,
yeah. All right. I think that's the flavor of the meeting.
It's helpful.
Going down a little farther, so the next change is going to be to cigar pricing. So the state is recommending an increase in pricing. I believe it was $2.50, and they're suggesting for singles going to $2.90, and then it was $5, and they're suggesting an increase to $5.80 for multi-packs. Again, just making them a little more inaccessible. These are some of the cheapest things I see in stores as far as tobacco products go.
It would make golfing much more enjoyable if people no longer smoke cigars on that.
They do that?
They do it all the time. It's a very popular thing. Don't ask me why. Maybe because they're outside.
I assume they go to
Family.
pot.
What?
Stop playing cigars.
What's that?
I assume they'll go to pot.
Maybe,
Stop
yeah,
playing
that's
cigars.
probably true. Anyway.
And then we come back to the manufacturer's documentation. So this is simply including here that the retailers need to have manufacturer's documentations on site. And then out of package sales. So again, this is something just at the state level that I already do enforce, but just adding it to our regulations, which is basically saying that nothing can be sold outside of its package. This does include, like, you cannot refill liquid nicotine containers, so like vape juice that can't be refilled. Yeah, the face, yeah. But you can't take something in and have that refilled at the store.
Gosh, I remember as a kid, you go to like a bodega and buy single cigarettes, and they would call them Lucy's, and
Yeah.
they'd sell them to any random kid. And you could say you're getting it for your dad.
Exactly.
So I can't believe we're still fighting
Mhm.
that's still a thing. It doesn't happen.
It can. When I train all of my young adults, when we do compliance checks, I let them know that if they hear this or if they see someone ask for a Lucy and if it's sold to them, that should be, instead of whatever product I'm sending them in to attempt to buy, that they should ask for a Lucy to see if it would be sold to them. Yes.
Lucy's the term used.
Yes.
Or it was a long time ago. I guess it's still the
Still
term.
It is,
but-
it is still the term.
It's still.
Yes. And then again, just kind of including other state laws folded into this for no out of package. And then incorporation of state laws and state regulations. So again, as the state continues to update, this is just saying that we are still going to be enforcing what the state does. Like, the state still has that foundation. And when I go into each of the retailers, I'm going to be looking for everything, state law, municipal, federal. Then as we go down, so there are kind of two sections also for updating fines. So apologies. Just do it. Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking of like the model regulation document and then this document that I put together, and they're running together in my brain. So yes, so it breaks down the fines. So if it's a state violation, first violation is always going to be $1,000, and this is looking at making it also $1,000 for local violations. So this is kind of the breakdown there, and then there's an option to look at suspensions. So for suspensions when it comes to first violations, typically permit suspensions are not applied unless it's a sale to a minor, in which case someone could have their permit suspended for up to 30 days. You can choose from 1 to 30. Most towns, I believe, do 3 days for a first violation. And then you get to a second violation within a 36 months or 3-year period. You have $2,000 at the state level for that fine, and then it would still be $1,000 at the local level. We cannot go above 1,000. And then again, looking at suspension. So for a second violation, no matter what it was, a suspension is usually incurred here as well. So again, that can be anywhere from 1 to 30 days. Most towns I see kind of choose 7 and stick with that for a second violation. And then you have third. So at the state level, that's a $5,000 fine. Again, local, which is 4,000. And then you have a permit suspension. And again, most municipalities that I work with choose 30 days for your third violation within 3 years. And then kind of an option to include, which I think is kind of nice to see at a glance, is what are the state level violations or state regulations, and then what are the local regulations. So you can have it here in a nice table telling you, okay, so for all of these things, you're looking at 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. And over here, it's all like 1,000. And kind of just at a glance, it's easy to process.
So, forgive me for not understanding this, but at the enforcement level, when you do a visit, are you only allowed to enforce the Brookline part of it? Are you related? I mean, so what happens if someone's doing a state violation?
I also enforce that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I enforce
Thank you.
all of it. Yeah, of course.
That's what I was hoping you would say.
I will say when it comes to anything that's like tax related, I call it DOR. But for these regulations, that's me. And then we have language around if there are 4 violations, so over 3 violations within a 3-year period. In this case, the commissioner and other municipalities, might be the Board of Health, will hold a hearing to see if a revocation might need to take place. That's going to be 4 violations in 3 years. That's quite a lot. I don't think in any of my towns, at least looking at like post records and everything, that's happened. But this is something to include. And then again, the language around failure to cooperate or interfering with my inspections or compliance checks will get you a 30-day suspension. And then it also includes language around if you do try to sell tobacco during your permit suspension, that will be another suspension, and also other like health department permits could be revoked as well.
Conscious of the time, right?
Oh yes, sorry, yes. I believe fines were the last thing on the list.
Okay.
So if we would like to move to something else.
So terrific, a lot of work went into this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Riley and
Thank
Anthony, for your support and engagement. So have you received the information, the guidance from ACPH that you need for finalizing this? I mean, in terms of sounds like in terms of the pouches you have.
Yeah.
And do we need to vote on the whole thing, or you'll come back maybe with take this language, go through everything, send us copies in advance, and we can officially vote on it at the next?
Yes, and then I think the last step will just be working with the town clerk and town council. to
Town
find
council
out
figuring out.
the process for when it gets implemented.
True. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
It's great. So moving from one substance to another.
Yes.
Anthony. Tell us about.
So I will be talking about Kratom. Let me go ahead and find my share screen button. Okay. So I don't know how many members of the group are familiar with Kratom. This has been a topic that has been in discussion for probably the last year in more intense debate, mostly at state level. Here in Massachusetts, a couple of towns have also been discussing it actively in the past few months, and we'll get to just who exactly is involved in this policy. So it's going to be brief. It's about 10 slides or so, give some background on this substance. So we're going to talk about the pharmacology and the impact of Kratom. Why is it a concern? In other words, why did I feel that this is something we should talk about and have on the agenda? And review options for addressing the problem if people feel it is a problem after the presentation. So Kratom is an herbal remedy used by people to help with withdrawal from opiates and opioids, but it can be addictive. It is not currently approved for any of the uses that will be discussed. And that is actually the source of the problem. In Southeast Asia, it is used as an herbal remedy, and as of this moment, in other words, in the last couple of weeks, as I've done more literature review, it's less of an issue in Southeast Asia because of the fact that it truly is used as the natural substance, whereas in the US and Western countries, it is an unregulated production, and that is the source of the problems in the West. It comes from the Mitragyna speciosa. It's an evergreen tree in Southeast Asia. It has both sedative and stimulant effects. So at lower milligram potency, so at the 5 milligram potency, it acts as a stimulant. Higher potency, such as between 5 upwards to 15, then it becomes more of a sedative type. The two most notable components of kratom are 7-hydroxymitragine, otherwise known as 7-HMG, which most recently has garnered some discussion with the FDA in terms of potentially regulating this substance. It is a partial mu receptor activity, and so those of you who may have had any type of pharmacology or health or medicine experience, this is when we talk about pain receptors as we think about mu receptor activity. And similarly, its other component, mitragine, also has a partial mu opioid receptor activity, but it doesn't have the respiratory depression of oxycodone, which some of you are probably thinking, wow, this sounds like a good thing, right? It provides some of these benefits that these prescription products have, but maybe not the negative things that we worry about, such as respiratory depression. But we'll talk a little bit more about why that's still an issue. So people who use this, again, it's commonly sold in gas stations, not usually in pharmacies. So the people that they are getting this from and accessing are not people who can provide extra context for the use of these products. But people will commonly seek this out to help with mitigating withdrawal from alcohol, opioids, and other illicit substances. Some, not as significant as the others, looking for improving sexual function, helping with psychiatric conditions such as anxiety and depression. And if you look at the pharmacology action we talked about, you can understand when we talk about the stimulant sedative effects, improving sociability, energy, and focus. Demographically, it tends to be, as you might imagine from some of the other points mentioned, that it tends to be more often used by men and typically Caucasian or white men and younger. So picture your 20s and 30s. Well, there's really lack of trials substantiating the benefits, rigorous trials. So for substance use disorder, there are no randomized controlled trials, just a couple of cross-sectional studies that showed that it is more likely to be used for withdrawal with decreased symptoms of opioid withdrawal. And that's basically survey data, not really like strong studied component and making a rigorous trial looking at this. For pain, it was just one single inpatient 1-day cold tolerance test. So they did it comparing to how much ice water someone could tolerate for their hands. There's no preclinical, sorry, there is preclinical evidence for potential benefit in pain and psychiatric areas, but again, no real randomized control trials done in this area. So toxicity is less common if it's used simply on its own or initial use. So if you were to try it once, really low likelihood that you would suffer any negative consequences. However, if you think about what people are using this for, so to help with substance withdrawal or for psychiatric conditions, the real concern is these are people who might not be well managed already and now are seeking self-treatment with a product that is not regulated, that is out on the market. It has real drug interaction impacts. And again, I'm not quite certain of the components for the group here today, but the two enzymes I have pointed out here, 2D6 and 3A4, are the most common ones that we worry about when we think about drug interactions. To make it more realistic for you, the examples of medications. So for 3A4, the second one, most HIV medications, amlodipine, which is a common blood pressure medicine known as Norvasc, simvastatin, which is a common cholesterol medicine known as Zocor, antibiotics such as clarithromycin, tamoxifen, which is used for breast cancer, immunosuppressants like cyclosporin and tacrolimus, fluoxetine, which is known as Prozac, diazepam, which is known as Valium, and probably the biggest issue, fentanyl, which is also known as believed known as Duragesic, but is also, as most of us are aware, is one of the key concerns right now in terms of contamination with illicit substances that people may buy. So real impactful drug interactions. And on the other column, 2D6, those are the most common antidepressants. So what are known as SSRIs, such as Prozac, fluoxetine, sertraline, atypical antipsychotics, such as aripiprazole, that is in that column, oxycodone, tramadol. So these are not medications that are less commonly used. Although immune suppressants aren't used very much, they have a real risk if there is a drug interaction in terms of the health impact. Prevalence as of 2020, which was the most recent data I saw, somewhere between 1 to 6% across the US. And the real issue with this that I bring up is contamination or adulterated products. And the FDA now, in this environment where, you know, I think it's pretty clear that the FDA has not had the most proactive approach to public health the last 8 months, but they are thinking about addressing that, which gives you a real idea of how much of a concern this might be if the FDA now feels like they might actually need to do some type of regulation. So balancing toxicity against the negatives, case reports of neonatal abstinence syndrome, neurological and psychiatric manifestations in neonates, not just abstinence, endocrine, cardiac, renal, respiratory, and liver issues that have been reported in adults. Most negative reports are in the West, particularly related to interactions with medications, especially those with seizure or psychotic disorder are at higher risk of decompensation. Risks are dose and frequency related. In other words, the longer you use it, the more you use it, the more likelihood of toxicity and bad outcomes. Drug tests currently don't capture it, and abuse is increasing, which is one of the reasons we're seeing increased reports in the ED of like, what do they do in this case? Getting to the policy level, so the federal level, there's your list of states that have taken actions. Ohio is currently discussing action. North Carolina is currently discussing banning it. Michigan is discussing limiting it to 21 and over stores, as are many other states. The FDA is considering scheduling the byproduct of kratom, 7-hydroxymetrogenine, similar to other controlled substances. Massachusetts, those are a list of towns. Canton and Northampton are finalizing actions. In fact, one of the examples of public policy that I have in the packet is the Canton version, which is more rigorous than Belchertown, which was the first community in Massachusetts to ban it. So you'll notice that Canton follows the finding structure that Riley previously mentioned for tobacco, looking at upwards of like thousands of dollars. North Attleboro restricted 21 and over stores. And as you have heard discussed with tobacco, I guess we could think that maybe this could be limited in marijuana stores in Brookline. Marlboro just had a hearing, and as of last week, I did not see that their minutes were published. And as you can imagine, it'll probably be next month before we see anything. There are bills at the State House looking at either banning it completely, such as the Senate bill or the House bill, which would make it a Schedule A control list of substances. And there are the options. If you think that this is a problem, what should we do in Brookline? Essentially, you know, banning it from sales or limiting it to adult-only stores. And with that, I will take questions. I know the studies I included seem to be balanced, right? Like there is data that we could see in the future that this might be a potential source, but my reason for urgency is this has not been studied. You know, one of the examples I give is those of you who may be familiar with, we use statins such as Lipitor and Crestor to reduce heart attack and stroke. Meanwhile, there are herbal options such as something called red yeast rice, which has a statin component in it, but it's not regulated. And we previously have been vigilant in terms of FDA quickly pulling those off the shelf because it's not regulated and there's a risk of toxicity. I could see that kratom is similar, that has some benefit, but until it's actually been studied and can be provided to people in the context of information, I don't think it's the safest option to have in places like gas stations or just generally out there when it's not regulated for what is contained and how people are using it.
Thank you so much. Two questions. One is the slide on toxicity. I'm just wondering how good the studies are there. Are they mainly anecdotes? Do we have some data within them about rates and so forth? Or so you shared something about the studies of benefit, but I'm just wondering about the quality of the studies of toxicity.
Yeah, so they weren't like percentages in terms of cardiovascular and renal. What you're mostly seeing is that it's increased frequency of visits to the ED, but we don't know. All we know is that over the last 5 years, the EDs are seeing it more, but we don't know what percentage other than it's increased. It's not a significant percentage. So if you think about the things little kids get into under the cabinet and things like that, or, you know, people who are a little bit distraught in what they do with their meds and that type of thing, that's not the frequency, but it is increasing over the years.
But you presented some data on different rates of effects on drug interactions and so forth. Are those more theoretical, or are there really good data that these are happening?
Yeah.
Are there any clinical information about what these toxicities really are?
Yeah. So the two most common issues with this are either contamination of the product or because of drug interactions leading to cardiovascular and renal issues in the ED. So the drug
the
interactions are real.
rates have gone up, is what you're saying. But you don't have data saying that of the people who use kratom, X percentage are having these kinds of results. It's more that we're seeing more visits for
Yeah.
potential complications.
Yeah. So in terms of prevalence of these issues, it's low, but the severity of them is high, right? Like the outcomes of like when you have a bad event is high, you know, things like deaths and ED visits for cardiovascular, that's the issue. So the harm, there's a low risk, but when the risk happens, it's a severe thing.
And the drug interactions, I guess, I mean, what I thought from the articles you gave us didn't really talk as much about drug-drug interactions as people who are using kratom are also taking cocaine and fentanyl and, you know, other things. And so it's very hard to disentangle the what harm. But you were also saying there's actual, you know, interactions between SSRIs and kratom that also are causing complications.
Yeah, so there are complications from the interactions. The articles, when they discuss things like with cocaine and things like that, I think are more with the risk of potential like for contamination. And also, you're using it on substances that have these other not other benefits, other actions such as stimulant and sedatives, right? And now you have this product, kratom, which depending on the dose, you know, if you're on cocaine and you have something that's providing a stimulant effect, or if you're using heroin or methadone and now you're using it at a dose that's providing a sedative effect, those are the harms from there. So those are again are the two components, or the contaminated part, and then the if you're on an agent, your risk of harm is higher.
And these are, this is because it's an over-the-counter, most databases and most physicians and dispensers would have no idea about the potential interactions of
Yeah,
other.
we can't even define it as over the counter, right? It's not your traditional over the counter as in sold next to acetaminophen and Tylenol. This is one of the classic substances that's usually sold in gas stations and convenience stores, not even like places where you could have the idea of, oh, there's a perception that it could be a medication.
Question, I mean, the capsules that are available, I mean, are those synthetic or are those derived from the plant? In other words, is the plant itself, although it's ubiquitous in Southeast Asia, is it available here as a medicinal remedy, as a homeopathic treatment, you know, to create the teas that are described in some of the literature?
I would have to look in and see if that's available and what the component or strength is.
Because in case we consider a ban in the town, you know, are there possible outlets where they say, well, this is an alternative medication or so, a holistic natural therapy or so, that, you know, it might run aground of, you know, say, well, do you ban everything, including the natural source, or just the capsules that are available as a derivative?
I could look in that. I would imagine that we would be targeting the two components, right? So like we're calling it kratom, but when you look at the regulations, it kind of specifies under kratom like what we're defining it.
Mhm.
I think it's in the whereas clauses. So I can look and see if it's available as things like tea.
Or if the herb itself, I mean, the plant derivative is available for processing, you know, at home.
Yeah.
And I guess the other question I had too, trying to look in the literature, I didn't really see anything definitive, but from its uses in Southeast Asia, are there any religious implications at all? Is it used as ceremonially in any way that, you know, again, could engender pushback, you know, if we put through an absolute ban?
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I did not see that as part of the discussion when I looked at other communities and even in the literature as far as like it being discussed as for religious use, aside from the therapeutic uses that it could be used for in Southeast Asia. But I will take a look and see if there is any potential that it could be for religious or cultural use.
Anthony, how old do you does a person have to be to buy kratom? Is this restricted at all, or is it like over 18 or over 21, or anybody could go into a store?
Right now, it's definitely not over 21. I don't know if it's even regulated. I can't speak to if someone under 18 can purchase it or not. It's in gas stations, so it's not adult only. And I know definitely you could purchase it if you're under 21, because I think at least one town that I had listed is looking, was it North Attleboro, is looking at doing it to 21 and over, and multiple states are looking at 21 and over. North Attleboro restricted it to 21 and over. Marlboro had a hearing, so I think Marlboro, that was one of the options they were thinking of. So it definitely is available for someone between 18 and 21. Again, I'd have to look and see if it somehow is available for someone younger to purchase. It's hard to say because it's not regulated. So I'd imagine it would be up to a store owner to say you look young for that. Why are you paying for it?
It's so weird. I'd never heard of this before. So.
So could you walk us through the two proposed regulations, and or at least highlight what the differences are between the Belchertown and the Canton version of the
Yeah, so essentially, let me just pull them up. So Belchertown was the first municipality to do it, and Canton was the most recent. So you could imagine that Canton, it seems like they might have had the benefit of potentially including some of the state fine structure, because they have listed in theirs the higher expense costs of $1, $2, and $3,000. I also think that they were more vigorous in terms of who might be in charge of enforcement. So Belchertown, so I left it in there so that it would be apparent, because ultimately I think it's also part of like John's sense of like where this should go. So for example, Belchertown also enforces the police department, or allows police to enforce this. So that's why it still says Belchertown Police in the draft that I submitted. So I think some of it is in terms of the violation. That's really the biggest difference, is the violation for fine structure, and just how rigorous it would be. So for example, Canton has that the violation each time is a separate offense, and um, they would be treated as separate violations. So I think it's just how vigilant do we want to be in terms of um, in terms of enforcement of the law.
So would these be the same kind of places that Riley's already going into? So while you're doing your checking on tobacco, you'll check and make sure that there's no kratom sitting around on the shelves and nobody's trying to buy it.
And go to gas stations.
I
Well,
do.
you do,
They sell
because they
tobacco.
sell
They sell
tobacco.
tobacco.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, excuse me. Thank you. You're prodigious.
Now, I'm not sure if that's all inclusive, right? Like I haven't been in CVS looking for kratom. Again, I would imagine that they don't. But I don't know if there are other places that are missing that aren't on the list of 17-ish or so tobacco permitted places. I don't know if the marijuana shops have it or other places. So that's the only area that I
So like
don't know.
supplement stores like GNC or whatever it is, do they exist? And I mean, they would sell this.
I think that would be the type of thing we would want to look into. And I think, Riley, we had talked about this, or maybe it was just my thoughts and I hadn't got to you yet, but our inspectors would be able to enforce this. We could have our coalition, which is restarting, go out, and they would just do spot checks, right? They wouldn't be enforcement, but they could at least go around to all these stores really quickly, especially if it was a robust coalition, which it will be. And it would save us time, because they could really get around the community and find these for us. And then we can go in with our inspectors and actually enforce the regulation. So I think over time we will become more familiar with where these are popping up. And I think we'll communicate with our other departments across the Commonwealth that are starting to enforce this and start to learn where these are starting to be sold beyond drugstores or not drugstores, gas stations.
So what's the sense about this? Those things that we think we should be regulating, and if regulating basically mean banning?
Well, I mean, regulating doesn't always mean banning, but
But in this-
definitely
yeah.
regulating so that, I think it's a little cursory check online. It sounds like it's not regulated by age, so yeah, I don't think you have to be even 18 to go and get that. I think you could,
You could
and
buy it. Right.
it sounds like there's some potentially really dangerous effects. So I think it's worth regulating.
Others, would you, Lynn? We can think about, we don't have to decide today. I just wondering what people are thinking.
I wonder too whether or not there's been any feedback from the Community Mental Health Center about like just anecdotal information amongst the treated population there, given the fact that it could be a dual user or so of, having certain substances and then potentially also having this as a substance use disorder mixed with it, or using it because of opioid withdrawal or for psychiatric indications. Just again, for I think further support for the ban, if we're hearing it to be a direct influence within the town, we're getting data from the CMHC folks.
I do think that this topic, it's funny because today I read the August edition of the pharmacist letter, and then I realized, I think education to our convenience store and gas station owners in terms of potentially taking not initiative, but coming to us or asking us about these products, because I was reading about something called gas station heroin now. It's tineptine, and I wasn't even aware of it. And now I'm reading that this is now in gas stations. It's incredibly hard to stay ahead of this stuff, as you've seen with the two topics we've talked about today. But I also understand, the convenience stores aren't in the place of like, oh, let me look at the health literature and what I'm selling. It's like, oh, I've noticed a boon, I'm going to sell this, right? But I would hope that with some of this, it's like, hey, if it's too good to be true, and you're making a lot of money, this is why we're here, right? Like, as in, is this something that, we should kind of look into versus they build a business model and then we find out about the negative consequences because, we're a town that we have few businesses to do this, but I would want to know if that's what is the help they need to kind of stay away from these things versus we find out after and then we're trying to react to it and it becomes this thing of like the idea of like a nanny state. Well, can you bring up these things that are kind of supposed to be used for health reasons and we think about whether it's even worth starting down that road? Because I haven't even had the chance to read about what tinaptine is, but if it's known as gas station heroin, that itself is just like frightening that it's starting to get a foothold.
But it seemed to me that if I'm a gas station owner or a small business person running a supplement group, that something that comes along the line that could be marketed as something that I can use instead of heroin, for example, and is, seems to be safe, at least the people who are trying to sell it to me to sell someone else. Saying that, it seems to me it's natural that that's going to happen a lot, time and time again. I'm sort of wondering as we talk, what else is being sold in gas stations that is toxic? I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff that's toxic there. And I know a little bit about the regulation of the supplement stores. It ain't very strong. I'm just sort of, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this. I'm just sort of thinking, you're asking a broader question, which is really, how do we stay on top of this in some useful way for the community? And I have no idea the answer is to that. And I can't imagine that you're going to be running programs for gas station owners regularly to talk about all their new products. Might be interesting to try to get into that. That could be an interesting innovation strategy here, but
Well, I guess I have a couple of thoughts. I think it's fine to educate gas station owners, but they've known that cigarettes, for example, are toxic, and most people, they still sell them. So,
exactly.
So I don't think we can count on that as a strategy to I guess I'm struck that I'm just comparing the two conversations. There were no studies of whether Zyn pouches are an effective strategy for reducing risk of smoking. And we said, well, but we still think it's a bad idea. So we said we should ban it. This one, there's no studies that say this is good or bad. This is, and we're more reluctant here than we were with the Zyn pouches. So I'm not sure why we're more reluctant here. We have a substance that's potentially toxic. We don't have, it's not been regulated at all. It's readily available. Wouldn't it be better to say, for now we'll ban it, let the FDA do its studies on the key ingredient. If they do a bunch of trials that said this is a great thing to help people get off opioid addiction, then it should be available either by prescription or over the counter, or whatever the FDA in its wisdom thinks is the right thing to do, assuming we have good things. And anyway, so
I think that's a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
But I think they are different. We do have evidence that nicotine is dangerous, right? We don't know really that kratom is. We have anecdotal evidence primarily.
Yep.
And very little substantive data of its danger. That is not to say that we shouldn't still ban it.
yeah, no, I agree.
I'm not saying that, but I just think these are very different.
So where do we go? Do we want to think about it, come back to this issue next month? Sounds like we're not comfortable right now with regulation.
Well, I think a couple things. I think this is helpful as a starting point. I think we need to settle on a regulation. It's going to need some, once we decide on one, they'll need some revisions, right? The Board of Health Authority rests with the commissioner, so I think that needs to be addressed in both of these. Which is fine. There's just a minor typo in here about that. The finding
We're
structure.
talking about this, is that right?
I think both of them mentioned that.
Yeah, I had to default whoever does it there. So it was harder for me. I didn't want to wordsmith too much between the two, because then is it like, what is the original? So I basically tried to substitute the name of the town or the name of, department versus public health or things like that. Legal should take a look at this, right? Like I just took two things that are already there and I just typed over it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, I think it's worth having a conversation with our substance use prevention team, because I think we could go out and do a little bit of just scoping to see what's out in the community right now. I don't think that should, stop this from going through, but I think we have some questions, so I think it'd be a good exercise for staff if they have time. And I think that's all information we can bring back, get legal's perspective on whichever one.
Talk to the Brookline Center. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it kratom alone, or I know one of the drafts had the synthetic cannabinoids?
Yeah,
Are you
my
interested in
preference would
both?
be to handle these separately.
Separately,
Not that I
okay,
don't want to handle
okay.
both, but I think, tobacco should be one, kratom should be one, synthetic cannabinoids is another one that I think we keep playing whack-a-mole with, because they keep changing the configuration of the compound. Yeah, so my preference would be to draft these, do them individually, and start to pass them that way, just so that if we need to update them, I think it's cleaner that way.
I know in your drafts you use this templates from Belchertown, just have to get rid of the Belchertown PD.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you though recommend a Brookline PD, or is that
No.
something that you're?
Conversation worth having with Brookline PD to
From
see if
the
there's, if we can share that, I'm happy to. I think because they're also out in the community 24/7, so that, I'd hate to see. I would imagine a gas station would put it out and leave it out, but I could also see them learning when we are working and when we are off, and deciding to, like putting it out off hours, like you never know. Right, and we get some feedback on that as it relates to some of the other complaints we get here, that we aren't here in the evenings, and sometimes we miss some things, so.
Or
Having-
weekends.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think having another enforcement agency could be helpful.
To be clear, though, this would just be on sales, right? Like I would not want this to potentially be a role where someone gets stopped and they're like, oh, you have kratom on you.
No,
No,
never, not in
no.
possession.
No.
Can I just add really quick? I did a quick search and I'm not sure if it's sold currently in Brookline, but it looks like they encourage to purchase it online. So it looks like it can't be delivered anywhere in the state. So just something to consider that they are saying the best way to purchase it is online.
Yeah, and that's what actually triggered it. If you remember, Charlie, the email I forwarded you to is an email that I get weekly. It's due 617, right? Like what is around Boston to do each weekend. And it was a huge, like it was probably, 40% of what to do in the 617. And then like 60% was just this huge color graphic, kratom, click here, buy here. And it was just happening weekly. And finally I was like, okay, that's enough. I'm hearing
Yeah.
my health my morning health email says this is bad, and then my what to do at night says, why don't you buy this?
Yeah.
Ouch.
All right, well, thank you for bringing this to us.
Yeah.
We've got some homework to do. I think we'll learn more. We'll put it back on the agenda probably for the next meeting,
Yes.
so we could keep thinking about it. We do have a bunch more items on the agenda and time is moving on. So warrant articles is the next item on the agenda.
Yes, and I can give a quick update. So it seems like a lighter warrant than we've had in recent past. And especially as it relates to public health, I think the only one that I've seen so far that you may all want to chime in on at a later meeting is the Alec Leibowitz had drafted a town meeting bylaw that would require constables, when they are serving notice of eviction, to hand out a resource guide to tenants that says, here are your rights as a tenant. And what brings it back to public health is it would be the responsibility of the Office of Housing Stability to draft that handbook. These resources already exist. The Office of Housing Stability, a lot of that work is going to be handled by the new Human Service Navigator that will be starting hopefully in the next month. And so when I talked to Alec about this, I thought about it, and to me, it seems like a good kind of starting exercise for the Human Resource Navigator to become familiar with those resources. So I told Alec that I didn't have any concerns around implementing this from a public health perspective. He unfortunately is traveling this week, so couldn't be here tonight to present it himself, but I wanted to at least give you a background and kind of a starting point for where we're at with this. And I did tell him we would invite him back for October.
So is the Dark Skies one not coming to us, or was there a light?
I haven't heard a ton of public health discussion around it so far. I know there's some conversation around brightness and as it relates to making sure like walkways are visible for seniors and for others. And I know it's a big regulation. I thought my understanding of Dark Skies was more about light going up. I know it's also brightness, but mostly you can direct the light, target the light down, and that should be sufficient. The less warrant articles that I need to address to the community, I'm happy to stay away from. So far, no one has engaged this office in that conversation. I think if ECPH really felt like there was a strong public health perspective here, we could talk about it at the next meeting.
I'm happy not to. I mean, Clint Richmond, initially, I know we've talked to Sabal quite a bit about it before. And I kept saying, why is there a public health? I mean, the idea is he thinks there's light pollution. The argument is there's light pollution and this is bad for the environment. So we should focus our lights more down. I know there are a lot of issues with the Chamber of Commerce is not happy about this. They think it's going to inhibit business. I have had an individual who was Paul Sainer, who used to be the chair of the State Commission of the Blind, and he was concerned that limitations on light would be difficult for people with visual impairments to navigate, which would be a public health issue, but I haven't heard any further. So I don't think we need to hear about it if anybody wishes us to, unless we want to. And if even the rent guidelines, I mean, if you think it's fine with the department and the department says it's fine, I'm not sure we need ACPH to hear it. I agree, it's controversial. And the only other housing one, and I know we've all been active in housing Again, I don't think we really need to weigh in on it. There is the street I used to live on Clark Road, Maimonides School. Their enrollment has dropped. They are selling their lower school and it's being converted. It's proposed to be converted into 30 units of housing and it needs zoning change, which will be approved. Which, you know, I think we'd be supportive of, but I don't think we need to get into that. That's the other housing issue that I'm aware of that's on the agenda. So we might be spared the opportunity to weigh in on warrant articles.
Which, positive, allows us more time to focus on these regulations. That's
And the next, so good, I think the next item we had on the agenda related to vaccines, which again, I asked John, given the amount of public information and confusion and concern we have both about COVID, access to the COVID vaccine, and there are a variety of other consequential issues depending on what ACIP does, and you know, insurance will be covered, what the vaccine reporting system is going to look like, what the vaccine availability will be like through VFC. So I asked John, give us an update.
Okay. So I think if not most people, everyone's aware that the governor did issue a standing order through the well, I think Robert Goldstein actually issued it. The standing order for dispensing of COVID vaccines. I thought that solved the issue. Then I started hearing from some residents that, at least as of right now, CVS is still requiring you to, review whether or not you have. It's sort of like when it first launched, when COVID vaccines first launched, and you had to say, I have a high BMI, or I have asthma, or I'm over 65. And so there are healthy individuals under the age of 65 who are currently being turned away from some pharmacies. I don't know how consistent that is, but I have some residents that I believe that have come to me and said this has actually happened to me in other communities, to be clear. So I was going to follow up. In the meantime, I went to the state's website for resources on COVID vaccines, and it does actually say, Massachusetts residents can now get it for those 6 months and up, right? At this point, consistent with prior years, CDC is not yet open to ordering, so that's tricky. But they do expect that to open up after the ACIP meetings coming up in later this week, on the 18th and 19th. Currently, while all Mass residents older than 6 months of age are eligible to receive COVID vaccines, scheduling online at a pharmacy such as Walgreens or CVS may require that you either self-attest to having a condition that puts you at risk, or confirm that you're over the age of 65. So they're aware of this, and they're putting it out there on their resource page. And they do say a majority of Americans fall into at least one of these categories for a condition. If you have questions, you can talk to your healthcare provider or pharmacist. We expect that this may change in the coming weeks and that this step may no longer be required. So that's sort of, and the governor has issued that all health insurers in the Commonwealth to cover the vaccine. So that's the steps the state has taken so far. We have had residents call and ask why we're not providing it. It is something we're interested in exploring. I don't think this is the year to do that, given that our public health nurse is out on parental leave, and so we are down a full-time public health nurse. But I think, given the state of things, next year our plan is to talk to our medical director and our public health nurse and consider starting to expand more into this and other vaccines. I think RSV is another one. Just given the state of everything, I think public health should be stepping into the space. And we've actually heard from the person who was directing. We used to be able to bring in a third-party vendor to do COVID vaccines.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was state funded. That funding has now been transitioned over to Vaccines for Children. So the program that allowed us to hire a third-party vendor no longer exists. What they've done is that staff person is now consulting to local public health departments to help them establish their own COVID vaccine clinics, essentially, to walk them through the steps. But again, given where we are and that our public health nurse is taking some time off, it just didn't feel like this was the right year. So I understand the frustration we're hearing from residents. We will continue to refer them out to the pharmacies, and our hope is next year to be able to push into the space and provide this as a service. I think the other thing worth noting is just it's an expensive vaccine. at this time, and I talked, we do have some support from our regional public health nurse, David Nyland, is supporting our town right now with the vaccine for children's and our flu vaccine clinics for this fall. And so he works in Arlington and Belmont currently, and they have done some of this work. It's an expensive vaccine. Right now, the amount insurances will cover is up in the air. And so he said his advice is let's wait. We should wait and see anyway, and we don't have the support to do it ourselves. So that's the state in Brookline.
And have we, and you know, this attestation, I've heard that from people both in Massachusetts but elsewhere around the country. That's common. Yeah.
Probably for an 8-year-old who has
Parents say they have some
asthma, right? Yeah, that's
and nobody asks. And then the question is, does that enter into some database at some point that's going to affect your ability to have insurance, which it shouldn't affect, but you never know. So, right. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I feel like I did this recently because I just got my COVID vaccine on Saturday, and I think there might be a selection that's like, well, I don't have any of these, but I feel that I'm at high risk. So you know, I work in healthcare, and
Yeah,
like
you're
actually
at
have to
risk.
get it. So I was like either get it in my office when it. So I have to go back and look, but it seems like there was like a long list. It was like no. Then there's one I think at the bottom that was like I believe that I am at high risk or something like that, and the pharmacist
could care less.
didn't care at all.
They don't care.
Didn't care at all. So,
Yeah, I think it's none of these, but I'm still interested because that's
Yeah.
the reason I've qualified the last however many years, or it's none of these conditions, but I believe I'm at risk or at higher risk or any other things. I think it's purely, you know, I don't know what, of course, they could use the data for now, but I think before it was just kind of like get an idea of what percent, right? Like we were getting this data that it's like for this age group, it's 20%, this age group, it's 40. So I think it might be more used for data collection versus saying yes and no.
Is there availability? So we're talking about drugstores, I guess, have it, but
Yeah.
I've heard physician offices.
we don't have it yet.
Yeah, we don't have it at MGH. We just got flu vaccine Friday. So COVID has not come in for us either.
So the only ones that actually have it sounds like are the pharmacists.
Even they've had some limitations.
And are we anticipating any difficulties with the childhood immunization vaccines supply, or anything like that, or ability to administer?
I have not
DFC coverage?
heard anything about that yet. I mean, I will say Kat planned ahead and ordered the vaccines that she knew she would need this fall ahead of time, so we were well prepared. I think there have been some challenges ordering vaccines. I think, like Anthony, for flu, ours has come in piecemeal and it's been slower than in years past, for whatever that's worth. And I know some other communities were trying to order for vaccines for children and having challenges.
But we have, because you ordered,
We ordered prior to last year.
what
The
do you have?
ACIP meeting on Friday is talking at pediatric scheduling for 3 vaccines, but I imagine that like whatever is going to be decided is essentially probably Monday or Tuesday. We're going to see something like AAFP and American Pediatrics all of a sudden come out with similar to statements with what we saw with COVID. I imagine just the way the composition looks like for Friday is it's going to come out that like medical groups are going to have to come out with another statement next week potentially, because there's probably going to be discussion about spacing out immunizations.
Right, and FA and NMR. I mean, the AP already has issued their childhood recommendations.
Yeah, they're already out the whole.
The whole schedule. Very comprehensive. Okay, well, we'll watch and see, but I have a feeling this town might see more people coming into the town.
Yeah, and I want us to be well prepared for it. I just think we need a little bit more time to.
All right, well, thank you, thanks for that update. I think important as much as we can to be for the department to be communicating to the public in the town. You know, so kiosks, as you said, in Coolidge Corner.
I think it's called Sufa or
Yeah.
Sofa, and
Yeah.
they have, I do feel like people read those and
It's a great
they're-
idea.
The e-ink screens that are,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great idea.
we use those. We definitely, I think Darlene and Kat both have an account and can update those. So we do put information out on those,
yeah.
among other places.
Yeah, or the Instagram, like Darlene sends out things. I don't know if Tanya's doing that. I don't know who does those. but-
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, director's report. Thank you for preparing it.
Sure. Any questions? I don't, I mean, there's a lot here.
There's a lot there.
I wasn't expecting, but all of our divisions basically had some good input.
Activity.
So what's this renamed, it's in the substance use prevention group, or was it Be Well, or?
Oh, Be Well, yeah, so
Yeah.
we've had a coalition in the past, we've
Yeah.
had some challenges keeping it up and running. We reconfigured that division to allow us to hire a coalition coordinator that should resolve that issue. And Layla's been fantastic, she's actually out at a conference right now for coalition building and substance use prevention, so we have met monthly for, I think, since Layla got here, and we are gonna launch the coalition this fall. And so the new coalition name will be Well, focused on wellness rather than substance use prevention. But obviously the emphasis for the coalition will be on substances. So we're excited to get that going, and I think some of the discussion we had tonight around regulations, I mean, I think those are some good activities that coalition members can work on, and I think as much as I agree regulation is going to be more impactful than education, that there is a seat at the table for business, and so I'd be curious to hear from some of those businesses on some of these substances. But she is doing great work. We're excited to get the coalition back together and then to start meeting consistently. Working forward for us.
And this maternal child and family health partnership, is that part of the Be Well work, or is that separate?
No, so that work is out of our shared service department, or division, excuse me, the Metro Public Health Collaborative. So as part of the framework for public health,
Yep.
you know, we did the analysis, and that was one of the areas that we are as a department, and I think honestly statewide, that is an area that's just not focused on is maternal and child health beyond vaccines and vaccines for children. We don't, as local public health, do a lot of work in that area. So, you know, Cam brought together all of the data for the 4 communities. It was across the board for all 4. The maternal and child health was an area that we could improve in. And so that is a priority area for the Metro Public Health Collaborative is to start doing some mapping and making some plans for improving that area for all 4 of our communities in the coalition, or in the collaborative, excuse me.
You interested in seeing metrics that you're using to track?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Good. Can I ask you about the CHIP then, in terms of the sub-teams or so? I mean,
Yeah.
because I think like the steering committee, apparently they met in end of June.
They met at the end of June. We provided, yeah, this is a great question. So, met at the end of June, provided them with a draft SOP, and started a brief discussion on potential members for the working group. So a lot of the work is going to happen actually in the working groups, and then the steering committee is going to be more leadership and guiding the whole CHIP. Opted, given the transition and the fact that it was the middle of the summer, that it was probably not an ideal time to try to get people together. And so essentially said, I'm going to wait until after Labor Day, and we have a Qualtrics survey. We have the PDFs of all the documents that we'd already shared with the steering committee. So now it's really just on my desk to get that email out to the current steering committee, to get them to review the SOP, provide any final feedback on it, and then we'll ask all of them to sign that document. And in the meantime, they're also going to be providing us with some recommendations for the working groups, and we will start getting those groups together this fall.
I gotta volunteer for at least one.
Noted. Yeah. And
yeah.
I think if anybody in the community ends up watching this, that they are more than welcome. We are looking for the 4 priority areas plus 1 for data analysis. And I've had several experts in data analysis that live in town that have wanted to help the department, so we will be reaching out to them. This is great. Yeah, we haven't had a good space to plug them in yet, and so I think this will be a good one. Really excited. Yeah, so appreciate everybody's patience, but I really just didn't think, by the time we got around to it in July and early August, I said, yeah, probably August is a bad time to launch this thing.
And just a quick question about your 90 plus non-COVID infectious diseases group that you're monitoring.
Is that under, let's go back.
I think it was under the public health nurse.
Yeah.
95
It's
non-corona.
not worth a lot of time.
Yeah.
Confirmed probable and suspect.
Yeah, so that's work that happens in Maven, so that the state reporting system, we're required, we will get notification if any of those diseases come back, and the public health nurse does a quick investigation.
What were the diseases we're talking
Oh boy, I can get you the full list, I'm not even gonna try to guess.
about? Don't.
But like tuberculosis is the perfect
That was
example,
obvious,
or a
right?
foodborne illness is another example.
Got it.
Those are probably the two that keep
Okay.
our public health nurses the
Is
busiest.
there any measles tracking that, in other words, someone may have been exposed in another
If-
location like Texas and comes here?
If it came here and it would get reported in Maven, and that would require investigation for sure.
Pertussis on that?
Yes, and we have
And
had,
is that continuing, by the way? We had a,
Now it's like steady state.
yeah, I've not heard anything, and Kat hasn't reported anything.
all right. Well, we have gone through the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Good.
Yeah.
We adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you very
all.
much.
Thank you. Good night, everybody, thank you.
Yeah, it was great.